Hello, and welcome to HMS 500 Human Services Management Principles and Practices, Module 3 interview with Sara Howe. I'm Mark Doyle, the Program Director of the Masters of Science in Human Services Management program here at National Louis University. Today, our topic is trade associations and what role do they play in human services? And our guest is Sara Howe. Sara comes to us with a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field and on this particular topic. Sara is the Chief Executive Officer of the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health, which is a statewide organization representing addiction and mental illness prevention, treatment and recovery service agencies, staff, consumers, affiliated agencies, and corporations. The mission of the association is to advocate for sound public practices and policies in the behavioral health field on behalf of clinicians, consumers, youth, family members, and individuals in recovery who are in need of services. As Chief Executive Officer of the association, her responsibilities include state and federal policy and legislative analysis and advocacy efforts on behalf of more than 60 community-based substance use and mental health disorder prevention, treatment, and recovery support providers that comprise the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health membership. Sara is also the chair of the Illinois Department of Human Services Social Services Advisory Council and is a member of the board of directors of the National Council for Behavioral Health and is the chair of their public policy committee. Welcome, Sara, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Human Services has many stakeholders, and one of those stakeholders in the field is trade associations. Could you share with us the role that trade associations play in human services?
Absolutely. The first thing I think that is important to know when we talk about human services trade associations is that there are many of us, and oftentimes we represent the many different sectors within human services. So as you walk through the different areas that you're working on, you might find different trade associations that are very focused on a specific area of human services. Our organization, IABH, the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health, focuses specifically on addiction and mental health services. But there are many others that I want to make sure that you're aware of as well. And the role that we play is really very unique and very needed within every state, as well as nationally. The first and most important thing we do is advocate on behalf of the providers that we serve and ultimately the consumers and the clients that we serve. We are the voice for those that don't often have one. Particularly in the area of human services, there are a lot of different sectors where the consumers or the clients don't have an organized voice. And the role that the trade associations play is that they become that very critical voice. They become the voice of the consumer, whether it's in meetings with the governor's administration, whether it's meeting with the legislature, whether it's talking to the media. They become that critical voice that is needed to relay back to the public what is happening in our field. The other piece is they're the voice for the service providers, for human service providers themselves. So, for example, we are the voice for addiction and mental health providers. What does that mean? When we go and we work with the administration or we go to the legislature, we're talking about what happens within that particular service arena. So what happens when somebody walks into a substance abuse treatment center? And what are the needs of that provider specifically to take care of the consumer? The end here is always the consumer and the client. But in order to take care of them, we've also got to focus on the service industry themselves. So the associations really play that critical conduit between the provider and the individual seeking services and those within the administration, the legislature, those that are making policy, those that are determining how policy translates into practice. And we are that critical connection between the two.
Certainly a vital role. What benefits should agencies expect from a trade association that's joined or is considering joining?
So there's multiple benefits that you can consider when an agency is joining, and we're going to talk a little bit about later on about the differences between the types of opportunities for joining an association. But right now, let's talk specifically about what an agency can expect. I'm going to pop over to our website to give you some reference here. Let me open that up. Okay, so on our homepage, and you will find this for any association, typically, if you are searching for an association, what you want to do is find out exactly the services Mark just mentioned. What am I going to get for my membership? So let's drop down to member services here. And what you will find is our level of membership. So we're going to jump right into our agency members. And this gives you an example. I'm not going to read through this for you. You can see this on the page. But what are you looking for as an agency manager, CEO, somebody working at a leadership level within the agency? What are you trying to find in terms of why should I join this association? Right here on our page tells you what you're going to get. So there are a myriad of things you might get. When you look at some of the first things that we talk about is membership in the state association gives you a membership in the national. That's not completely unique. You may find that in multiple areas. So you want to look at what is the best value that I get? And one of the opportunities here is I get to be a member of both the state and the national association. That's a nice perk that several associations offer around the field. But then the other piece here, and I really want to focus in on this section right here. And this section talks about what do you get? And the first thing you see here talks about access to information. Probably one of the most critical pieces that you get from a trade association is communication. You need to know as an executive what is happening. It is absolutely impossible for you to try to manage an organization and keep track of everything that is happening at the legislature, with the administration. What is the news going on today and why do I need to respond to it? That's the role of the association, is to filter all of that information and get it out to you in usable bite-sized chunks. And I say that specifically those bite-sized chunks because, as I'm sure you're all aware, we live in a 24-hour news cycle right now where you can get a lot of information thrown at you. The trade association should filter that and get that back to you in a usable way. So what you see in this section here is it talks about communicating what is happening. And what that association should also do is not just communicate what is happening, but they should tell you what you need to do about it. Is this information? Is this, I need you to respond? Is this, I need you to call a legislator? Or is this is something that you need to act on today because it's a change in policy or practice? That's the role of the association. The other section you see here is that we represent you. What we do is we represent you at meetings you can't be at because, again, you've got an agency to run, so you can't possibly be at every single meeting. The role of the association is to represent our members in numerous meetings, numerous public venues. And then the other piece that I think is really important, and you see we mentioned it down here in terms of media, marketing, and PR, is we are that conduit between you and the media. So the other role here is to provide you opportunities. When is something happening in your community where I'm going to reach out to you and say, did you know, for example, we're seeing a lot of issues right now regarding the opioid crisis. There was 5 overdoses last weekend in your community. We're going to help you write a press release and get information out to the local constituents about how you can access treatment. Or the news might come to us and say, hey, there were 5 overdoses over the weekend. Do you have somebody that we can talk to? And then we'll connect the media to you so that you aren't an island alone doing services within a community. We help connect you back to that larger community, and it helps make your job easier as well. So this just gives you a little bit of information on what you should see when you're trying to evaluate a trade association.
And I think I saw this in the website that you just shared with us, but it leads to my next question, which is, are trade associations only for large organizations, or can individuals join and benefit as well?
So I think the important thing here is, and we'll jump back to the screen in a second, is that there are a multitude of the types of associations. There are trade associations typically mean they are provider organizations. When you talk about a trade, that means they're representing the industry as a whole. There are individual associations. Often you hear them as societies. Society of Professional Engineers, for example, would take care of individual engineers, not necessarily the engineering firm. And then many organizations do a hybrid. So let's go back to that screen and I will show you what we're talking about. So here we mentioned the agency membership. As a trade association, if you hear that word trade, their bread and butter is most likely the agency, the industry. But then there are other areas. So what we have is actually a hybrid. We have a membership for corporate members. Those would be organizations, companies that serve our members or have an interest in behavioral health care. So what might that be? An electronic health records vendor, for example, that works with our agencies and wants to know more about what's happening within the state of Illinois. They might be a corporate member. We have another membership that's called an affiliate membership. When you look at associations and you analyze them, you'll see that the word affiliate really runs the gamut of what it could be. For us, it's typically something like a coalition, another association that wants to benefit and work with us. That's another opportunity. But affiliates can be pretty much far and wide. There's multiple definitions. So you'll want to check when you're reviewing what's happening with an affiliate membership, because sometimes they will even combine that affiliate and that corporate. And then the final thing, we talked a little bit about this, which is the society concept, the individual members. You don't always see a trade association that has an individual member component, or you see just an individual member component and not a trade association. We've done actually a hybrid here at IABH, and I think it's important for the students to understand why this is critical and why this is necessary. So on an individual membership basis, we're working directly with the clinicians. We're working directly with the professionals. So while a trade association serves the industry and the agencies, when you have an individual membership, it's going to benefit you, the individual, you, the clinician. So here it gives you some of our member services, but I think it's also important to recognize that they do need to advocate on behalf of those that do the services in the field. So you can't, when you go back to that end user, let's go back to that consumer. We want them to get the services they need. We want them to get addiction services, mental health, maybe it's domestic violence, whatever the service is, right? First, we need an agency that provides those services, and then they have to staff it. That's where you all come in. That's where that individual membership becomes important, is this gives you an opportunity to connect directly with the association to keep up to date on what is going on in the field. Because by now, I'm sure you all know there's so many different things that you can be keeping up on, that it helps to have an association be part of that process for you. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later as well.
Well, can you share with us the difference between state and national associations and the unique role that each of them play?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep sharing my screen here. I'm going to go to the National Council for Behavioral Health to start with. So we've got national organizations, state organizations. Frankly, we have international associations, but we won't touch those today. But we do have some of those international societies and associations. So what you see here on this webpage is our national association. And the first question you might have is, well, what is the difference? And if we talked about earlier that for us, if you join IABH, you get a membership in this national council. So what is the difference between the two? The national organization, by definition, will do a lot more work in Washington, D.C. That's the first thing. They're going to be working on Capitol Hill. They're going to be providing you information on what's happening on Capitol Hill. They're going to do different events. So let's go over to Hill Day, which just happened a few weeks ago in D.C. So as a national association, they pulled together actually around 700 advocates that were on the Hill a few weeks ago. So they take everybody from around the country, they put an agenda together, and they give us all the information that we need to advocate on the Hill. So see if I can drop down here if they haven't gotten rid of all the schedule yet. This gives you a great example of what happens on a quote unquote Hill Day. So this entire first day you see is information. This is how to get you ready. So it's Advocacy 101. How do you meet with your lawmaker? And then what you see here are different workshops that are going to tell you a little bit more information, advanced advocacy, what's happening on a bipartisan level, how do we build bipartisan support. All of these sessions happen all day. And then we do this big send-off. You see we have a send-off. We've got a legislator, Senator Stabenow from Michigan, went to the Capitol, and then all day long we had elected official meetings. And then what they did was give us, and I'm hoping they have them here, but I'm not sure that they do. What they will give you is all of the information that you need. So they will give you handouts. And I'm just gonna do one more thing. Here we go, this is perfect. So what a national association does, and it will be mirrored at a state level for statewide issues. Let's make sure we're clear about that. But from the national point of view, they have taken the view of the whole United States and filtered that information so when you go talk to a legislator for 30 minutes, you don't have to know all that information. As a matter of fact, you could click on this right here, and now you have a handout that you print out and you give to the legislator. So this talks about appropriations, which is probably one of the most important things that any state or national association will do that works in government, is of course talk about the budget. So here's a document that you're able to take off, print off, and hand to them. Couple things here. Let's look at it. It's got appropriations. Why do we need the money? What's happening? Different funding requests. What are all the different bills? So if we think about from a national perspective, they're keeping track of all of these bills right here. Then they break even more of them down to say, here's my request. The 21st Century Cures Act passed last year. Now what do we want to do about it? Well, we want to fully fund it. So all of this information is synthesized for you, put into one document, and given multiple documents that you can pick off. So you can go to these fact sheets and you can see any one of these. And then if they're really good, which the National Council is, they give you a cheat sheet. Here's your talking points. So if you're not sure what to say, I got it right here, right for you. A good national association will give you this information, and they will help you as you even talk from a statewide perspective. They'll work with us. So they'll work with us as the state providers and say, here's some information. We might be able to use some of these basic messaging and then turn them into a state message as well. So that's just literally one thing that a group like the National Council does. If I can find their homepage again, but I've now lost it. Here we go. They will do other things. If this pops up for us, they've got a conference. Typically, you'll see right here, talks about their national conference that will bring advocates from all over the country together. And again, high level information that what is happening from a very, very 30,000 foot view is what I would call it. So what is happening in the field? What are the trends in the field? What are the things that we need to know is happening? What is innovative? What have other states done that maybe you want to know about so you can implement it here? That's the role of your national association. Then we take it down to our statewide again. We'll go back to the homepage here. So now we're going to take that information from a national level. We're going to filter it down even more, and we're going to find out what is happening here at the state level. So we're going to look at policies, how they've been translated, what things are happening within the state, and we're going to give you more information that is very relevant to the state of Illinois. National organization is going to tell you what's happening on a broad 30,000 foot view. We're going to really filter that down for you here. And then you see we even have our own conference. It's very similar in the sense of the format for an association. But the information is different. It will be connected, but it is definitely different. The final thing I just want to share, I'm not going to go into this too much, but I know you guys have an assignment later on. This is the National Association of Associations, basically. This is the American Society of Association Executives. There's a wealth of resources on here. You can see their different meetings, all the resources they have, what they do for advocacy, meaning they advocate just on behalf of associations as a whole. As you're doing more research on associations, ASAE is a good resource for you as well. Oh,
There we go. Can you hear me now?
I
Okay,
can.
thanks, Sarah. If I'm a small organization with limited funds, is there, and generally there's an upcharge to joining the National Association. So if I had to kind of choose between which one I would start with, what would you recommend?
If you're a smaller organization, boy, that's a really good question. I think it definitely, I lean towards the state association first. A good state association is going to be part of their national association. They're going to try to get that information and synthesize it to you. Are we going to get you every single thing that's happening at the national? No, there's too much to try to cover. But let's take the Affordable Care Act. That's a great, timely topic for right now. We've seen the repeal and replace bills on the Affordable Care Act happen repeatedly over the past 6 months. So as you might imagine, our national association has been all over what is the impact of repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act. Then they send us information with action alerts, those same fact sheets, the things that I just showed you. And because it was such an important issue for our membership, we would translate that back out. It may even be the same thing. We might just forward that message out saying, this came from National Council, and we really think you need to make those phone calls. So that state association will at least triage what is happening from a national perspective. And when it's really, really critical, they're going to get it out to you first. Now, there are some small organizations that are really connected to the national. And I have seen the opposite, where they're part of the national and not part of the state, because they feel like at least they can get a very broad view of what is happening in the field. Certainly that is a preference. I would say, though, if I was having to make a choice between one or the other, I would go with the state association. And then I would ask if there is any type of agreement like we have where you get membership in both. Sometimes they just might not have thought about it. And that's oftentimes, I will say, how trade associations develop their member services is from their members. So it just might be something they didn't realize. They might have been able to call that national and see what they can do to come up with a bundled rate. It's worth the ask.
This kind of leads into my next question, which is, given the fiscal crisis created by the extended period of time without a state budget here in Illinois, why would an agency choose to join a trade association during this time of limited financial resources?
It's a really good question, because the first thing that agencies look at cutting is anything that doesn't impact staff and payroll, which on the surface is a pretty reasonable expectation. Unfortunately, cutting the association is cutting off your nose to spite your face. How do you stay up to date on what is happening during things like a state budget crisis if you're getting no information, if you're not connected? Particularly in light of this state budget crisis, this was where we did the bulk of our work, where we were holding hands of our providers, literally. So providers would come to us and say, I haven't been paid in 6 to 8 months. What can you do? Well, we have those connections where we made calls. We had one agency, for example, that unfortunately they ultimately did shut down about 3 months after we intervened, which was actually a pretty lengthy period of time given the budget crisis. But they came to us and they were going to shut down by the end of the week. They had, I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but they had a lot of dollars in receivables, and they weren't going to make payroll. And we picked up the phone. We called the comptroller's office. The comptroller made a visit to their agency, moved some money out to them so that she could keep them open for at least a month, sat down with them, and they openly acknowledged that the years of neglect in terms of the state budget had put them in a really, really difficult position. We knew that going into this, but she wanted to try to keep them open as long as possible so that if another agency could come in, maybe purchase them, acquire them, merge with them, we didn't lose those services in the community. So we knew up front that we were triaging this issue. But the point here is, without our intervention, they were closing in 3 or 4 days. The connection here was, we have developed, and any good association should develop this. I would say that up front. When you're evaluating an association, they should have these kind of relationships. And we've developed relationships with the key policymakers in the state where we were able to pick up the phone, talk to the comptroller, and say, they've got some vouchers sitting at your office. Can you get them paid? And she did. She ultimately got them paid, kept them open a little bit longer, even longer than they expected. And they did eventually close because of the state budget. But I think it was still a victory for us. I mean, we kept people employed longer, gave them more of an opportunity to figure out what they were going to do, how they were going to take those people that were in services. This was a substance abuse agency. How they were going to get those people to another agency instead of kicking them out within 3-4 days notice. So without that connection, they would have been gone that day, the next 2 days. So I think that's where it really illustrates it's really important to have those connections. One thing I always tell students is build your connections for the long term, whether it's an association, whether you're working in an agency, whether you're just talking about your career development, build your connections for the long term. An association, that's their job, is to not only build those connections for the long term, but when you need them, you can reach out and they can work with you to help. So I think in a time frame like this, it's really critical to have those connections. It's critical to just know what's going on, to know what's happening at the state budget, know when I need to call a legislator, know that, oh, my legislator just said in committee that they believe that there's no point in having mental health services. Well, guess what? You want someone to call and say to you, Senator so-and-so just said this, and invite them to your agency, help them understand. That's where it becomes just absolutely necessary in these really tough times.
You had mentioned already that trade associations leverage the voice of several members, member agencies with state and local government. What are some of the more notable areas of funding, policy, legislative, et cetera, and some specific examples that your trade association has impacted?
Well, we did talk, I probably jumped the gun talking a little bit about the Affordable Care Act earlier, but that's okay. I think that's a great example. Right now, I think let's talk a little bit about the opioid epidemic. And even a very, very recent example of what happened over the weekend. And I know by the time your students see this, it won't be over the weekend, but just recently over the weekend, there was a story about the DEA and how their enforcement authority was weakened based on a bill that went through Congress and was signed into law under President Obama that once it was signed, nobody really knew the damage that it would cost. And 60 Minutes and Washington Post did a story on what had happened, how the DEA had been undermined, how some of the attorneys from the DEA had ultimately been hired by the pharmaceutical industry, how the pharmaceutical industry had gotten together and decided that the DEA was cracking down too much on the enforcement of opioids. Opioids going into these small communities, literally millions of pills going into small communities, and people have died from the opioid epidemic. This happened on Sunday. Today is Tuesday. On Monday morning, one of the large national associations got together and said, this is unconscionable. Look at what happened. The congressman who was the primary sponsor of the bill has now been nominated to be the drug czar, which is the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, the head of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, or ONDCP. He has been nominated by the president's administration to be the next drug czar. There was a call to action yesterday morning to reach out to the White House and request that his nomination be rescinded now that we know what has happened behind the scene, which was really working on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry, not on behalf of the families that were impacted by the opioid epidemic. So that call to action happened yesterday morning. Before I got into the door this morning, he had withdrawn his nomination as drug czar. So that's a very relevant example of what just happened in the last 24 hours when associations mobilize together. And that's the other part of what Mark just asked, which is, you bring in several voices together. So that's a really large scale umbrella discussion where you talk about, we took multiple associations, all agencies across the country that came together and said, he is not fit to lead, and we need to make sure we voice our opinion on this. That's a great large scale example. But on a small scale, when you're talking about a statewide association, you should have several members from all across the state. And I think this is the other key piece is in a state like Illinois, we have, excuse me, we have very diverse geography. So you've got the city of Chicago, you've got suburbs, you've got areas like Rockford, you go down to central Illinois, and then you've got southern Illinois, and some many rural areas of the state. A good association has representation in all of those areas, so that when they're talking to policymakers, when they're talking even to the local legislator or the media, they're bringing in all of that expertise, because what might be good for Chicago might be really bad for Carbondale. So an association leverages all of our members. We find out what is it that is best for the field, and then we put forward a recommendation. Now, sometimes I will say not every single recommendation is going to be best for every single member. And that's important to understand. There may be a bill on rural health. And so that's really going to help, obviously, those in Carbondale, and probably not in Chicago, right? But that's an important piece, that we understand what are the needs of our agencies and how do we recognize them and how do we problem solve them. So that's when you take multiple groups and bring them together. So that's, I think, one example. I want to talk a little bit about the budget as well, because it's a very relevant example. And unfortunately, I think it's going to remain a relevant example for a while in this class for several years. So in the past, even before we had no budget or a true budget crisis that we talk about now, we still had opportunities where our dollars were being cut. And what do you do during those critical times? So I'm going to go back into 2009. I think it was 2009. It may be even earlier. Some of these years blend together anymore with the budget crisis. But I believe it was 2009. The budget was passed by the General Assembly. The governor got the budget, and it was out of balance by his staff's estimation. So they needed to cut. They needed to do line item vetoes. What happened was a $55 million line item veto to the substance abuse line. More than half of the line item that was vetoed out. This is a little different than the budgeting process. When you're looking at a budgeting process, it starts in February, we negotiate, we talk about it, we have proposals, and then ultimately the General Assembly passes a bill that the governor looks at. During that process, it's all theory. We're talking about it in the theoretical at that point. After the budget is passed and when the governor has vetoed it, or particularly line item vetoed, that's really the critical piece here, the rest of the bill becomes law. So immediately at that point, our field lost $55 million on the spur of the moment. So what happened from an agency perspective is you, the CEO or the CFO of the agency, had budgeted a certain amount, and you were told, you woke up one morning and were told, you're not going to get that amount, you're going to get half of that amount effective today. So you're now scrambling to figure out, what am I going to do? Am I going to cut staff? Am I going to see how my association is going to respond? And are they going to get this money back? All of those pieces come into play from you, the agency director, determining, what am I going to do? How am I going to manage this? So our job is to take all of our members immediately on a moment's notice, gather this information. First of all, what are you going to do? So we're going to call you, or we're going to email you, and we're going to say, what are you going to do? How much did you lose? Are you going to cut staff? Are you going to hang on? Give us the immediate impact. And again, I think it's important to remember at the end of this, it's the client and the consumer. So what we also want to know is, what is going to happen to those people that are in your agency today getting services? Are you kicking them out at the end of the day? Are you holding on for a week? Are you giving them notice? Are you going to dip into your fund balance? All those pieces come together. We leverage all of that information from all of our members, and then we package that into a media response, an immediate media response. And any good association understands the power of media. You pull that all together, and then you triage from the back end. What I do is I triage, where are we seeing some of the damage that's immediate? Where are people hanging on? And I'm going to go, frankly, to where the damage is, because I'm going to go take the media right to that agency that is saying, I'm really sorry, young woman, single mom with 2 kids, but I don't have a space for you anymore. And I'm going to tell them, put a camera on that. And I'm going to help that agency do that so that the general public understands, what does that $55 million cut mean? That's really the key piece. So then we pull all that together into a package from across the state. And what you develop is a pretty clear picture that cutting $55 million is a really bad idea. And that's why I go back to 2009. We did get all of that money restored. I believe the call came mid-July, and it did not get restored until maybe October. So it doesn't happen overnight. People did get kicked out of services. I mean, people did lose their jobs. There was no warning. And so I will say that too about an association. Most of the time we have our pulse on exactly what is going to happen. We're a little prepared, but not always. Government's unpredictable. Sometimes you don't know exactly what's going to happen. We were surprised by this cut. We're not planning it at all. But how you mobilize and how you respond to it, that's what a good association does.
How does the Illinois Association of Behavioral Health balance the need of having a good working relationship with an administration or state agencies against the need to be critical when policies and proposals require you to do so?
That's a great segue from the last discussion, because when you are railing against a governor, there is a risk. There's an absolutely calculated risk. And a lot of times, and particularly in that example, I was in the media a lot, and I was extremely critical. So there's a couple of things here. First of all, you do have to balance when to use that firepower. And in a time like a $55 million reduction, it's kind of all bets are off. You cut $55 million and sorry, but I'm going after you. You cut $2 million, I'm not liking it, but I'm probably going to temper it a little bit more. And that's where you rely really heavily on your association. Again, this is where your association becomes really critical. First of all, they are going to give you kind of the direction on how you should react as well. Because your initial thought of that $2 million cut is, what the heck, man? I am so unhappy and I'm angry, and I'm going to call my legislator. I'm going to tell him. And we're going to say, now, hang on. Your legislator is chairman of appropriations. We might not want to get him too upset. Now, if the chairman of appropriations just zeroed out your program, yeah, we're okay with that. But that's where you temper that, right? That's where you decide. So we have to do two things. We have to internally decide, hey, we've got a great working relationship with the administration. Is this worth burning that bridge? Is this all hands on deck and, hey, this is what we're here for? Or are we looking at the long-term strategy and saying, I think we can work with them without beating them over the head in the media on this? And we have to make that determination on a daily basis, actually. I mean, I get calls from members every single day saying, I need help with this. I'm angry about this. And I have to decide whether I'm picking up the phone and screaming about it or if I'm going to work on it. The other piece of this, though, again, is signaling to your members what to do. So a good association will say, make these phone calls, and here's what you say. If we go back to those talking point fact sheets that says exactly what to say, in times of crisis like this, they should also tell you exactly what to say. And they should signal whether this is a time to really ramp it up or this is a time to hang back. And sometimes what you will find, and this is probably the third and final piece I will say on this, is that the association is going to be a little more vocal than the agency. And for good reason. We have 60 plus agencies that we represent. If I go on camera and say, you know, I just heard from a member today, can you guess which member I heard from? No. Now, if I get on and I say agency XYZ told me, yeah, you're going to be able to figure that out. But my job is to protect you as well. So you might call me and say, I'm having a really hard time with this policy. You know, I talked to this legislator. They're not willing to move on it. What can you do? well, I'm not going to call that legislator and say the agency in your district's having a problem. I'm going to talk with them about what's happening from a field perspective. And I'm going to protect that agency because unfortunately, you don't know in politics and within working with administrations and legislators what they'll remember in the future. So the last thing you want is your name out there as the leader of the charge. That's what an association should do, is also protect you. And that's where you pull everybody together. But again, we might not use all of our firepower that you'd like to see, because it goes back to balancing that relationship and knowing when is it time really to hit the ground running and move on
How does the association maintain their neutrality when working with the General Assembly on budgeting issues if one party has a better idea than the other?
it? That happens every single day. And I will tell you, it's not always easy, but you have to really work with both sides of the aisle, regardless of what your personal beliefs are. At the end of the day, they are all elected to represent their constituents, period. And that's the important thing to remember. And the more you can work with both sides, the better off you're going to be, the better working relationship you're going to have. Now, oftentimes in human services, you'll find one party or another is typically more aligned with the issue that you're working on. But that doesn't necessarily mean all the time. It switches. There are times where you think, oh, the Dems are really going to be with me on this, and it's not. It's the Republicans that are on it. Same, it happens all the time. The great example is literally my very first encounter with a legislator. Very first time my boss brought me into a legislator's office was 17 years ago now. We were talking about industrial hemp, which isn't an issue anymore, right? But at the time it was. And we were looking at legalizing industrial hemp. And our organization at the time was solely focused on addiction issues. We didn't work in the mental health space at that point. And we were concerned about what industrial hemp would do. We were opposed to the bill. So we went into the legislator's office, and I think there's an automatic assumption, since they were the sponsor of the bill, that they were going to be opposed to our issues in general. So we had this really lengthy discussion about basically agreeing to disagree. It was a nice, cordial conversation about our concerns. He talked about why he was supportive of it, and we kind of said, well, we agree to disagree. And we were getting ready to walk out the door, and he started a conversation about a totally different issue. It was related to addiction, but it had nothing to do with industrial hemp. And he said, this is also an issue in my district. Would you guys want to work with me on a bill? So he basically had walked into his office and said, we oppose your bill. We're going to try to kill your bill in a very nice, cordial way. And we left with an opportunity to work with him on something else. So that's where I always remember, you can never write off an opponent. You can never make assumptions from what party they're in. And as an association, you're not supposed to be partisan. You're not a PAC. You're not a political action committee. You're an association of members advocating on their behalf. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter what party gets it done. You just want it done. So that's the important piece of it. You are sometimes going to align yourself with one or the other just because you like their proposal and you're going to support their proposal. But as long as you're continuing to communicate with all sides, and I think the other piece, and again, your association staff is really good at gauging this, is both sides will try to pull you into the partisan politics. And it's your job to understand whether this is my issue or not. So you'll get calls saying, would you do a press release on this? Would you come out and support my issue? All of those pieces come together, and you have to decide, is this me supporting the issue, or is this me being utilized in a political manner? And you have to decide. And if you feel like maybe this is more political, then you have to say, that's not something we're really able to take on. And I've said it many times, where they might, I'll get one side that will call and ask us to do something, whether it's the General Assembly or the governors, either side, and we'll say, hey, we still got to work with the other guys. I can't do that. And they say, okay, we know. We just thought we'd ask. Yeah.
Okay. My next question is, since we're a university and we have students who will be graduating, what are the benefits for recently graduated students in joining the association?
I think this is really, really important because as you're a new a graduate coming out into the field and you're trying to get a handle on everything that's going on, trade association is a great place to start because they're going to do a couple things. First of all, they're going to help you get educated really quick on what is happening. That is right away what's happening in the field, what's going on at the State House, what's happening on the Hill. So you're going to come out with all this knowledge from your degree program, and you're going to be able to say, and here's how I've applied it, and I understand what's going on at the state level. That's really critical, or on Capitol Hill. The other thing that you're going to do is have that network. That's really important too. You want to have a network of colleagues that you can work with. That's what you want to have right up front. So this gives you that opportunity to start building your network, finding out who else is in the field, who are leaders that you can work with. Oftentimes, trade associations will do leadership development programs, workforce development. I know the National Council does a Middle Managers Academy where we're building our middle managers for leadership. They have all types of programs. And at the end of the day, you're getting more connected to the field. And the trade association will help you do that and really help you solidify your career path.
So we've learned a lot in a very short period of time about trade associations. So the big question is, why join the Illinois Association of Behavioral Health versus another trade association?
I get this all the time. So I think, again, when you're looking at any association, and particularly ours, you want to look at what expertise do you have in-house, and what do I get for my membership? And we really believe that we pull all of those pieces together. So we have that bundled national association, which I will say we are the only behavioral health care association that has the opportunity to be part of the National Council for Behavioral Health. So that's a really nice benefit right off the top that nobody else can say that they have. As well as we do have quite a bit of experience and expertise. It's not just me here. I have a team behind me that does a lot of work with a lot of experience. I've got staff that have worked in state government, with the legislature. I have other staff that have been clinicians in the field. We all work together to pull this together on behalf of our membership. Like we talked about, like that $55 million, that is something that I'm very proud of. Nobody thought when it happened, I was flat out told, you will never get this money back, so don't even try. It's not going to happen. Well, I have a letter from the governor that says, and I keep it because it's signed by the governor, and it says that we got the money back. And I have talked to numerous people, one who now works for me, that said what you guys pulled off and put together on a moment's notice was incredible. And that's why I believe we have the pieces together to be part of an association. And I think the other final piece, and this is, maybe you're not going to work in behavioral health, but you're going to look at other associations as well, is we work on behalf of our members each and every day, meaning you can pick up the phone and call me. You're going to get to me. You're going to get to Eric, Randy, whomever in my office. Those are the people that will answer the phone, will work through your issue, and then we're going to do it right away, right now. I had an email just last week from a member that said there was a deadline for something within the state. It was really short. The turnaround was really quick, and all the materials weren't even on the website. And this was I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday. At the very latest, it was Wednesday. And she said, can we get the deadline extended? And immediately I said, I'll see what I can do. And it was extended by Friday. That's what a good association does. That's what we do, and that's what I'm really proud of.
Great. Is there anything additional or additional information you'd like to share about the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health?
We've been around 50 years. So that's really exciting for us. This is our 50th anniversary. And we started out as just an addiction association. So that's the other piece. I'm really proud of the fact that we have evolved as the field has evolved. And I think that's, again, something to look at when you're evaluating an association. We started solely as an addiction organization that moved to including mental health and representing the entire field of behavioral health care. And I'm really proud of that because that was quite a shift for the association, but it was necessary to make sure, again, we were taking care of our members. So that's something to know about us. I will say, as I mentioned before, you're welcome to look at our website. We've got a lot of information on there as well as different workshops from our conference that we actually just put on that website, so you can see those slides. If you have any questions for me going forward, Mark has my contact information. I'm certainly happy to work with any of you. I really believe that at the end of the day, a good association can really change the trajectory for an agency and for a staff member. And I'm happy to help work with anybody as you move forward in your career. And I just appreciate the time today.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Sarah, for being so generous with your time and sharing such a wealth of information for our students here at National Louis University. I believe they're going to find this information valuable as they move forward in their career. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
You're welcome.